Did anything happen in Overland Park this week, now its open gun law is in effect? Marking the one-year anniversary of the disappearance of baby Lisa. Aiken back in the headlines, plus 6 years after the death of Kansas City baseball legend Buck O'Neil this week, why there's now a tug-of-war over plans to turn his former home into a museum. Hello, I'm Nick Haynes. It's great to have you with us again on the program that goes beyond the soundbite and takes you behind the headlines making news in Kansas City. Dissecting those headlines this week from the Call newspaper, senior writer Eric Wesson, from News Radio 98.1 FM chief reporter Bill Grady, from the Kansas City Star reporter, columnist and blogger Dave Helling, and KCTV5 chief investigative reporter Stacey Cameron. Now, on Tuesday, a city ordinance allowing people in Overland Park to openly carry firearms went into effect. Reacting to a non-binding Kansas Attorney General opinion, council members in Johnson County's largest city had passed the measure to fend off what they considered to be an inevitable legal action against them if they didn't. So, with almost a full week of the new law under its holstered belts, what has been the impact, if any, in Overland Park? Just to remind our audience, the ordinance allows people in the city to carry a handgun openly as long as the guns are holstered and with the safety engaged. But unlike with concealed weapons, no permits with their extensive background checks are required and no safety training. So, did we witness large numbers of people in Overland Park with guns hanging from their belts this week, Bill Grady?
No, we do not. And as a matter of fact, the city just sent out, within the last day or two, an email explaining their position on it and why they took this position in accordance with the Attorney General. And now, of course, the seed has been planted, so it probably will spread.
Now, your station, Stacey, at KCTV5, was reporting, though, on local gun shops in Johnson County, some of whom did see, though, an increase in sales of holsters as a result of this ordinance going into effect.
Right. Heather Staggers filed that report in OMB Gunshot in Overland Park Gun Shop, talking about an increase of holsters being sold, people going to the range to shoot and practice, and as well as a number of those customers being female. I think an interesting point to what Bill said about the city sending out an email. That email is legally wrong. The mayor said that it was a legal opinion issued by the Attorney General. It was an advisory opinion. And he said the city had no option legally but to amend the city ordinance. That isn't a legal binding opinion, so the city didn't have to act. It chose to act in this matter for fear that it might be sued. But we're talking about a Kansas law that dates back to 2007. We haven't seen the legislature or the state courts move against any city that hasn't permitted open carry. So I think it's a little early for OP to start acting in this manner and pass that ordinance.
Now, last week we did talk about why is it just Overland Park doing this. We did read this week that in Prairie Village, for instance, the Prairie Village City Council unanimously voted this week to uphold its ban on the open carry of loaded weapons in public. Their attorneys telling them this does not need to be interpreted this way. What is then the difference between Overland Park and Prairie Village, Dave Helling?
A different legal judgment and a different political judgment. And I think one of the reasons, by the way, you're seeing the emails that you are in Overland Park is because members of the council there and Mayor Gerlach understand they're paying a little bit of a political price for this. It doesn't seem overwhelmingly popular in Overland Park to now allow open carry. My guess is, based on what Stacey and Bill have said, that this will end up in the court somehow. Wyandotte County is pushing back. Eventually, a judge, the legal system will have to weigh in on which, whether the state law or the local ordinance prevails, whether these restrictions are reasonable or have some reasonable relation to what local governments can do. So we'll wait for the courts. That does not ameliorate the political problem for Carl Gerlach.
But as Bill Grady pointed out, though, Eric, it's not like we've seen overwhelming numbers of people now going out and carrying these guns openly in Johnson County's largest city.
Right, and the bigger picture is, do people feel that unsafe that they have to go to this extreme? Is it an intimidation move? Is it going to give people a sense of confidence because they're carrying a weapon out in the open for everybody to see? Or will crime go up? Imagine some elderly person carrying a gun and going through a parking lot and somebody push them up against the car and take their gun. I mean, it's a lot of unanswered questions from people on the other side of the state line on why this is such an issue.
Bill.
The one thing I wanted to add is that the merchants still have the option of prohibiting firearms in their establishments. And if enough of them do that, then these people are going to be relegated to just walking down the sidewalks with their guns. And so, you know, it really does kind of cross the political and the commercial boundary.
Yeah. Starbucks, though, announcing, and that was in a Mary Sanchez article in the Kansas City Star, saying that they don't want to get involved in the politics of all of this, so you can carry a gun in any Starbucks in Overland Park.
Well, and politics really is what this boils down to. It was the Kansas Libertarian Party that's really pushing this issue right now, and in a press release that they issued, I think it was a week or 2 weeks ago, they said one of the impetus behind this was to make sure that people's right to bear arms were not infringed upon in the state of Kansas. But let's not forget, the Supreme Court has decided your Second Amendment right is pretty solid in the United States, and this idea of open carry, it goes against common sense. We look at Oklahoma that has an open carry weapon, and you are required to get a permit. You are required to go through safety training. So really, for me, that's the issue. I don't care if we have open carry laws or not in Kansas, but I do think there should be the requirement, just like concealing carry, that you have to take a class, you have to have the background check, and you have to make sure that the gun is permitted.
Dave, did you want to say something?
Just only this, to reinforce this idea that it's political, Nick. Records show, or evidence shows, that concealed weapons, open weapons, all these debates we have about weaponry in this country have very little actual impact on crime virtually anywhere. It's really more about both sides mobilizing their supporters for political reasons, and not because there is any direct impact on the crime rate, although occasionally, anecdotally, it'll have an effect one way or the other. So this is much more about politics, Nick, than it is about policy.
Well, let's talk about politics. In the most closely watched political race in our region this week, two new polls show Missouri Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill leading Republican Todd Akin by 6 points, as Akin faced a new round of questions about 4-year-old comments about abortion providers. In a 2008 speech on the House floor, Akin linked abortion providers to terrorists and suggested it was a common practice for those providers to give abortions to women who are not actually pregnant. Akin, a St. Louis area congressman, also is being asked to answer this week why he failed to report 10 years of his Missouri state pension payments worth about $130,000 on his congressional financial disclosure reports. We'll get to that in just a moment. But first, who was digging up those old abortion comments? Who uncovered these remarks from Akin in the first place?
I don't know that we're sure precisely, although in contemporary politics, Nick, as you know, opposition research goes back decades. So my guess is if we knew for sure, there would be some Democratic hands on this issue. In isolation, what he said, though, is not completely out of the mainstream for what Todd Akin has said for many, many years. You have to consider that story and all of these stories in the context of the state of that race and the criticism that he's getting and the focus on the race, going all the way back to the legitimate rape comment. And it is just one more straw, really, on the camel's back in this campaign. That's why people are paying attention to it.
Now, he countered very swiftly, though, and said from his campaign that he brought up the quotes here, released a statement from Abby Johnson, whom the campaign identified as a former Planned Parenthood director in Texas from 2007 to 2009. I can attest that when I served as a director, we often scared women into getting services that they didn't need, including abortion, so we could collect the fees. This included women who were not pregnant and women who were in the process of miscarrying. So does this statement validate what Congressman Akin said on the floor in 2008?
Well, I don't know if it validates completely what the congressman said, but I think it goes back to another argument that we've heard often with Planned Parenthood and abortion, is that there aren't great record keeping. We saw what happened in the state of Kansas, for example. And so proponents that are pro-life or opponents of pro-life politics are always going to use these kinds of statements to advocate their arguments. What is most troubling, though, is that goes back, I think, to a 1978 article in a Chicago newspaper. There was an investigative article saying that doctors were performing these kinds of practices, and then the woman in Texas kind of comes in to corroborate that. We're talking about issues of abortion. People are split on one side or the other. I don't think this necessarily is going to shift the race. I think, unfortunately, for Congressman Akin, it's taken every other issue off in the Senate race that he might want to be talking to. And as long as we continue to talk about these issues, Akin's campaign is off the rails.
Eric.
I think one of the strategies that Senator McCaskill had from the primary on was that she knew that he had made some statements that would be controversial and could come back and be used against him. So it's not unusual that these statements are coming up, and I think there's probably a laundry list of other ones that he's made, civil rights, the statements about education, Social Security. So I think in the process of her figuring out which one of the opponents that she wanted, I figured that she knew that he made some statements that were going to come back and be very
What about
controversial
the
against
pension benefits then? Failing to disclose then for 10 years his state pension benefits in the state of Missouri on federal forms. He said on your own station this morning, Bill Grady, on KMBZ, he was on the radio this morning saying, I just failed to fill in a box. Inadvertent error. Why are people just nitpicking all of the time every single thing that he's doing?
You hear the inadvertent error comment quite a bit, and it's obviously not going to have any impact whatsoever on his base. It probably won't have a big impact on which way this race goes. As Eric said, though, it adds to a growing pile of things that he has said and done, and it's just not looking good for him. I mean, we had the ladylike comment last week. So this is a little more solidified because it does deal with money, but Akin's position consistently has been, I don't want to talk about that, I want to talk about the issues, and he kind of resounds all of the very conservative positions that he takes.
Can I just say, the McCaskill campaign may be treading into some difficult water here if they make an issue, for example, about abortion, because if abortion becomes a big issue, that would excite the Akin supporters in southern Missouri, the boot heel, the very voters that he used to win that primary. If they got more interested in that race, that could be a problem for McCaskill. And frankly, Claire McCaskill doesn't want to talk a lot about personal financial disclosures either, largely because her husband's own finances could potentially become an issue, not to mention her property tax problem on the airplane, which was also an inadvertent error. So the campaign is starting to wander into places where maybe the Democrat doesn't precisely want to go.
But in taking all of that into consideration, I think that the bigger picture is the top of the Republican ticket big enough, powerful enough to get their voters out? Irregardless to what direction it is, if the Democratic ticket can maintain their base, get their base out to vote, people in the Republican Party, we still got this 47% thing that nobody has dealt with. Is the top of the ticket good enough to get people out to vote for Akin in the first place? I haven't seen any yard signs, ground game, the commercials come and go. Will he have enough money to even sustain in the race to be a factor? So right now, and interesting that Senator McCaskill is only 6 points up. And I think that goes with some of her personality and how people relate to her.
I did notice this week the McCaskill announcing she's raised $5.8 million in the third quarter, which may be an all-time record for Missouri fundraising in a 3-month reporting period. But at whose then expense has this come? Somebody's not getting money because she's raising all of that money.
Well, so, other Senate candidates in other states.
But it's not because other local regional candidates are not getting that money?
Senate money at that level is really money that might be going to other Democrats in other states.
All right, all righty. Well, we'll continue to track that race. But I will say the U.S. Senate race in Missouri is sucking the oxygen out of coverage of many of the other regions' political races. Before Election Day, we will be spotlighting some of those regions' other races. Kansas City Congressman Emanuel Cleaver is up for re-election. He's taking on Republican Jacob Turk, who has run against Cleaver twice before. Turk runs a computer software business and lives in Lee Summit. But does he have more ammunition this time around? This week, the story of the Cleaver car wash hits the headlines again. How Bank of America was filing suit against a company owned by Cleaver that had purchased a Grandview car wash but did not pay back their $1.3 million loan. Why is the story from the spring news again this week, Dave Helling?
Because the court ordered the Cleaver Company, LLC, to file its response to the original lawsuit filed by Bank of America. And in essence, that response was basically not guilty. We didn't do anything wrong. There was no real argument, no evidence offered. It was just sort of a placeholder for what the Cleaver Company and Emanuel Cleaver are going to claim going forward. So it's sort of a record-keeping story. This is their response. The trial isn't until April. Frankly, Nick, I think I don't have any firsthand knowledge, but my guess is they are negotiating some sort of settlement. If you assume the congressman doesn't have $1.5 million to pay his debt, which I think we all do, but there's no real incentive for either side to settle before Election Day. The congressman, for obvious reasons, the bank really, you know, it's Bank of America. It isn't as if they miss this money immediately, and it is guaranteed. Most of it's guaranteed, about 75 cents by the SBA. So my guess is discussions are going on to settle this, perhaps sell the car wash, but I wouldn't expect it to be settled by Election Day.
Now, Jacob Turk came within single digits of defeating Emanuel Cleaver 2 years ago. Bill Grady. Does this become a campaign opportunity, this kind of an issue?
It could, but I haven't really seen him pick that up and run with it. And Congressman Cleaver's defense has been, I didn't buy this car wash when I was a congressman. I was not in public office, and so therefore, I mean, I think that's probably his way of saying you can't hold this one against me. There were a number of other mistakes. But I don't think Jacob Turk is as visible now as he was in 2010. Maybe Dave could weigh in on this a little bit more. And you know, I recall in 2010 even that he called a major news conference to make a major announcement. And that announcement was that he had come up with less than $50,000 for a TV schedule, which is not a lot of money. So I don't think that his campaign is terribly well heeled.
Okay. Eric.
I don't think he has that much of a chance with that. The car wash, even though it continues to be an issue for the media, it's not really an issue that would keep him from being reelected. As we saw, there's some other things going on, but I don't think he has the money to run a good campaign. And first of all, there's no comment about him not living in the 5th district that he's running to be a representative from. So there's a lot of things going on. Well, I think that the congressman has helped people, and he's got a record, and I think he'll be able to run off of that record rather than his personal
Just to make
business.
the record clear, the reason Jacob Turk doesn't live in the district is he was gerrymandered out of it in a deal that Congressman Cleaver's people were involved in. So putting him in another district,
Republicans,
well, and Republicans too, no question about it. And you don't have to live in the district that you're seeking to represent in Congress. That's not required in the Constitution.
Now, many people
Turk has talked about moving into the district if he wins.
Yeah.
Cleaver's argument that this shouldn't be held against him doesn't hold water. The fact that he got the loan in 2002 prior to going to Congress doesn't rebut the fact that the business was run into the ground while he was in Congress, and that loan up to $1 million will be paid back by taxpayers and not the congressman himself. What Dave says is absolutely correct. They do not want to settle this at this point, because if you default on an SBA loan, your wages could be garnished, any dividends you hold from a corporation could be taken, as well as some of your personal bank accounts. Now, what does the congressman negotiate in this default? And if it's something better than you and I could get, then it's going to make a lot of political hay. So I kind of fought the local media, because there's a lot of questions that should be asked here that the congressman is not being pressed on. We are nitpicking Congressman Akin over in Missouri, but we're not nitpicking on Cleaver. And I think maybe to some degree the media is picking favorites here.
Well, let me just say that the Cleaver people would not agree that the media is not nitpicking on them, because I've written about this story several times.
But nobody's asking these questions. He says it was bad business practices that caused this, but nobody's pushing him on what are these bad business practices, and were you part of those decisions? Yes. I haven't seen that question asked of the congressman.
I think the car wash is up for sale now. I think they're going to be closing that deal within about 60 days. But there is a difference between him being nitpicked on political statements that he's made rather than personal business decisions. But I think those are two different
But these are taxpayer dollars. These are taxpayer dollars that will be refunded that the congressman won't have to pay back.
But you don't know that because the court hasn't made a decision yet on who's going to pay for what. Bank of America might have to suck it up and lose it. So you don't know that because it hadn't gone to that point.
And we'll continue to follow this story, as we will some of those others. And we will nitpick. An excellent point, very much so. Why has Kansas Congressman Kevin Yoder got massive campaign signs all over Johnson County when he has no Democratic opponent? Asked one caller to the program this week. If you live in Johnson County, you may think Kansas Congressman Kevin Yoder was in a hot political race. He has huge, gigantic yard signs at a dozen major thoroughfares in high-traffic areas, and he doesn't even have a Democratic opponent this November. Why is he working so hard with only a third-party opponent? Quickly, an answer to that question?
He fears a Republican primary opponent in 2 years, a conservative.
Okay.
And the Sea of Galilee story feeds into that, so I think he's trying to run up the numbers this time.
Okay, so I hope, caller, you've got your answer. We don't talk much about crime on this program, but as this was a massive national and international story when it broke, so we would be remiss in reviewing this week's news if we didn't at least mention that this week marks the one-year anniversary of the disappearance of Kansas City infant Lisa Irwin. Her parents say the baby was kidnapped from her Northland home. Police have worked 1,667 tips, including 500 baby sightings around the world. And exactly 1 year later, Bill Grady, authorities still no closer to establishing how she disappeared?
Not at all, or if they do, they're certainly not saying anything about it, Nick. This is one of the most confusing stories because kidnapping of infants is it's a very low percentage crime. And this story has just been all over the board. There's been so much subterfuge. These folks from New York came in, kind of parachuted in, left the lawyer and this high-profile private investigator. And the $100,000 that's allegedly being offered in the case, I talked to the TIPS hotline yesterday. They don't know anything about it. And yet John Paserno, the attorney for little Lisa's family, her parents, was really on the offensive at the vigil the other night, saying these people have been persecuted. They have answered every question, which Kansas City police disagree with. And, you know, this has involved everybody. The FBI, the National Guard was searching for this child at one point. And it just may be one of these great unsolved mysteries.
It is astonishing, though, Stacey, that this case, after a whole year, all of this attention, still so unresolved after all this time.
Yeah, you look at, the figures have about 58,000 kids a year go missing that are abducted by someone other than their parents. And a small majority of those go unresolved. So the fact that we haven't been able to have any type of clue or motive or person of interest in this case is astounding. A lot of people point back to the Kansas City police and the way they handled this investigation at the beginning. A lot of people have said in a case of a missing child, the best people to investigate these are the forensic experts in a homicide unit. They're most adept at protecting evidence at the scene of a crime, and we simply didn't see that in this case, and we don't see that in most police jurisdictions. So I think, unfortunately, maybe the only thing to take from this case at this point is a review of our policies, police procedures, and how we investigate these types of crimes the minute they're reported.
Saturday marks the 6th anniversary of the death of Kansas City baseball icon Buck O'Neil. The Royals still honor him today with the Buck O'Neil seat at Kauffman Stadium, and now there are efforts to turn Buck's former home into a museum. The Kansas City Star reports that Buck bequeathed his 2-story home on 32nd Street in Kansas City's historic Santa Fe neighborhood to his church after his death, and they now want to turn it into a museum honoring his life and legacy. But the house needs about $100,000 worth of repairs even before adding exhibits, while the effort to preserve an historic home seems laudable. Doesn't this seem like an uphill battle when the museums at 18th and Vine continue to struggle, Eric Wesson?
That's not going to be a museum. The church wants to use it for a Section 8 property. There was another group that came in that did the renovations. They want to use it as a housing unit for 3rd District City Council people. The Negro Leagues Museum is like, the name Buck O'Neil belongs to us. We do the fundraising under that name. Then you have Mr. Gates and the Education Center saying, I can't use Buck's name to raise money, so how are they going to use it to raise money as well?
Now, but the Star article, though, did say they were going to make it into a museum to honor Buck O'Neil. So the baseball museum won't allow that?
No, the baseball museum's board member said if Buck wanted us to have that house and be a museum, he would have left it to us. He left it to the church. The church's agenda is to turn it into Section 8 housing so they can generate income. The nonprofit group that developed and started to renovate houses said that they wanted Jermaine Reed and Melba Curls to use it for housing for the 3rd District as an office for them to connect to the community. No one knows who the Star talked to that said that they wanted to turn that house into a museum.
Ah, so we found a difference there. You were actually investigating the whole 18th and Vine area yourself, Stacey Cameron, earlier this summer when you were dealing with that whole area. How is that area doing at this point in time?
Well, the area is doing fine in terms of it doesn't owe any money in terms of bonds that were floated. There's only been about $70 million put into that district. However, that district is poorly managed in terms of marketing. We haven't seen an explosion of tourism down there. We have infighting on the board. We have multiple directions that different people want to go. We see properties like the Gym Theater and the Blue Note that aren't adequately used in the neighborhood to bring in national touring acts. So there's a lot to be left desired down there, and it's a simply, from what I have seen in conversations I've had since that investigation, the people that should be accountable don't want to be accountable, and it's a difficult knot to unwind down there. And so if that house were to be turned into a museum, I would hope that private sector would take that over, and not anything that's government or quasi-government.
Yes.
When you get into 18th Street, I think JDRC did a search to have somebody come in and manage the rest of the properties down there. It doesn't, 18th and Vine has an identity problem. It doesn't know whether it wants to be an entertainment district, a restaurant district, or housing. But I hope that sometime soon they develop that, because we need some grocery stores and restaurants down there.
It seems in many ways at 18th and Vine, it's one step forward, two back. You remember when Emanuel Cleaver was mayor, he took a lot of criticism for authorizing the purchase of Charlie Parker saxophone for $40,000. The Peachtree moved out and moved into the Power and Light District, which ironically at the time was being accused of discouraging black patronage, and that was a big, big blow.
And that is all we have time for. We're going to continue to nitpick that story too. Our thanks to our news reviewers. I'm Nick Haynes. From all of us here at KCPT, thanks for spending part of your weekend with us. Goodbye.